Hello and welcome to PowerSpeaking Live. I'm Carrie Beckstrom, the host of this monthly series and the CEO of PowerSpeaking Incorporated. I heard a quote recently that has really stuck with me. A closed mouth is a closed destiny. This was shared by a graduate of one of Asante Africa's programs, which is an organization devoted to providing educational services and support to underserved youth in East Africa. And this quote, a closed mouth is a closed destiny, was shared to him by his mother when he was a young, shy boy. Her message was simple but powerful. If you don't speak your ideas, your hopes, your perspectives, if you keep them to yourself, they can't take shape in the world. And I've been thinking about how often this shows up, not just in the big life-defining moments, but in small, everyday situations. In that meeting where you hesitate to share your point of view, during a presentation where you hold back just ever so much and don't fully own your message. When you're in a conversation with a leader or a client and you soften your words just a little too much. It's not that you don't have something to say. It's that often confidence gets in the way of how and whether you say it. And that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be unpacking how you communicate with confidence on command in those big moments, those little moments, and everything in between. And joining us for this conversation are two of our expert facilitators and coaches. First off, I'd like to introduce Amy Ferber. In addition to facilitating our workshops and coaching many of our clients, Amy is our lead facilitator, which means she plays a pivotal role in supporting our global team and is responsible for certifying every new facilitator who joins PowerSpeaking. Amy, welcome to the conversation.
Thanks, Jerry. I'm happy to be here.
Also joining us all the way from Germany is Ralph Wolter. One of Ralph's many gifts is helping highly technical professionals translate very complex ideas into clear, commanding communication. And just recently, Ralph coached, I believe it was 31 speakers at Cisco Live in Amsterdam, where I have no doubt, Ralph, you played a key role in helping boost their confidence moments before they stepped onto the stage. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Carrie. I was tempted to send my AI avatar, but I thought today I'll attend in person. So yes, happy to be here. Thanks.
I'm very grateful you did. It somehow would have diluted the message if I wasn't actually speaking to the Ralph Wolter. All right, let's get into the conversation. And I'd love to point out to our audience, if you haven't seen it, we have posed a question in chat. Love to hear from you. Which of these shows up most for you when you're communicating under pressure? A, overthinking what to say. B, softening or hedging your message. C, losing your train of thought. D, not speaking up at all. And so far, B, softening or hedging your message, is the winner. Please. We're getting more. Okay, wonderful. All right, so let's get into the conversation. A lot of people think confidence is something you either have or you don't. And fortunately, that is not true at all. Ralph, in your experience, what are keys to project the appearance of confidence when communicating?
Well, let me share a story. All of my life, I worked for global US companies. And when I joined ages ago, and I was invited to present, and I compared my own presentation with my US colleagues at that time, I thought, well, I'm doing a terrible job. And I had no idea why, but I thought, well, maybe these were all naturally born presenters. It changed when someone told me that in the United States, you learn to present in the age of kindergarten, versus in Germany, you have to go to university. And if you're lucky, the topic is addressed. Often it is not. And it's a question that often comes up in our workshops is like, do you have to be born as a great presenter? And do you have to be born to have confidence? And based on my experience and my own story, I would say that's not true. We can learn those things. What we often think, and we've heard that many times in our workshops, is when I get on stage, I feel a little bit of anxiety. We can later on discuss what that really is, but we feel it. And so we think everyone can see it. And then because we feel it, we tend to act. And then we start acting nervous. And sometimes people look like they're operating windmills or constantly washing their hands or doing all of those things that are everything but signaling confidence. And what we've seen so many times year over year over year is when people stop these behaviors and just start adjusting their style, voice, eyes, pause, those elements, suddenly things change.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing that story. And as someone who was born and raised in the US, I can assure you that even though it is taught in some schools, there is still all kinds of need to help people learn how to project greater confidence when they communicate. I'm hearing that more and more, especially people who are graduating from college. They just aren't prepared to project and show up the way that they really need to in a professional environment. So this I would argue is needed more than ever. And some things that come to mind from my perspective when I think about the specific things that project the appearance of confidence. One certainly is composure and really taking the space to own your message, not feeling that you need to rush through it. You need to project the fact that you deserve this time, you deserve this airspace. I think so things such as pausing can be incredibly powerful. Obviously, eye contact, making the time to really intentionally connect with your audience, having command of your message. That doesn't mean it has to be communicated in a perfectly polished way, but really having confidence in what you're sharing and owning that message are just a few of the many things that come to mind. Amy, so let's dive into one of the number one things we hear about all the time in coaching and in workshops, and that is strategies for effectively managing nerves. Obviously, nerves are one of the barriers to owning the space and really communicating with confidence. So, what are your top recommendations in terms of more effectively managing nerves?
When it comes to more effective management of nerves, it really comes down to experimenting with what is going to work best for you because there are a lot of strategies. So I'll share with you some, and I would encourage if you're one of these people that tends to get nervous, which I think most of us do if we care about what we're about to go do, It's worth experimenting and trying out what might actually have a pretty positive impact on you. One of them is moving. Prior to actually going into that presentation, let's say it is in person and that's not something you've been used to for a while. It might be you taking a walk around the building or up and down the stairs a little bit, get that adrenaline pumping in the right direction. It might be you've done that and you're still feeling really anxious. How about taking some deep breaths where the breath out is actually a second or two longer than the breath in? Because I learned this from one of our colleagues who also happens to uh, used to own a yoga studio. And he said the key with breath is the longer breath on the way out actually calms the nervous system. So that can help for people. But let me give you a couple of others. One, a colleague and I were talking about this exact topic recently, and she reminded me of this idea of sort of reframing your brain around that nervous feeling that you get when you're about to go into that meeting or presentation. It's like standing in line at a roller coaster. Those folks out there, like my husband, who loves roller coasters, are feeling excited. Like their heartbeat is going a little bit faster than normal. They might be just kind of dancing in the line. And then there's people like me who absolutely detest roller coasters. And I am actually having a pretty similar experience to my husband while we're standing in that line. My heart rate is going a little bit faster. I might be sweating a little bit. But if we can start to reframe our brain around the fact that we're in the exact same line, how can we switch our brain to remind ourselves that this potentially could be a good experience? I am in service to my audience, the people who have asked me to come present. And for me, if I think about them, it helps. It helps me to reframe the way I'm thinking about it, and I actually feel a little bit less nervous in the end. And so really what it comes down to for me is using your body to get some of that energy out. It might be going for that walk, taking the stairs, taking the deep breaths. It might also be if you've been sitting all morning and you're about to give a virtual presentation or be in a meeting, how about you stand up, go into the bathroom, stretch out your arms, do some jumping jacks, do what you need to do to get your body ready for the experience.
Wonderful, wonderful advice. Yeah, and David Binder said he loves the roller coaster analogy. I do too. I love that. And I'm with your husband. I embrace them. The scarier the better. Rob, is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, one of our clients nicely summarized what Amy just described in one sentence: make friends with the nerves. And that's something that helps me and that helps lots of clients. And the other is, in a nutshell, what Amy described: anxiety and stress has almost the same body reactions as excitement. And so this reframing or relabeling to me makes a big difference in our mind.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Another piece of advice, and I know you both share this, and all of these are excellent techniques, especially leading up to that moment when you're about to present or go in a difficult conversation or a meeting where you feel somewhat uncomfortable, is ensuring that you have your opening down pat. I mean, you know it in and out because if you start strong, inevitably that's going to help calm those nerves and have you be more present in the moment. If you come out of the gate faltering, it makes it so much more difficult to recover. So I'd say that's another very, very important strategy.
And Carrie, I would add to that. I mean, I think this is probably going to be covered as we go through the rest of our conversation, but one of the best strategies for feeling less nervous is preparation, to your point. So prepare the heck out of the beginning, but also prepare what you're going to say. I've had people say, I know the content so well. I've done this work for 10 years. I can walk in and just talk. But if the nervousness is there, it's probably worth the strategy to start thinking about preparing a little bit differently.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm coming back to that quote, which again I think is just so profound. A closed mouth is a closed destiny. Remember, the best things in life, the best growth, the best rewards come from stretching yourself outside of that comfort zone. So push yourself, be willing to take a risk. I mean, what a shame to go through life holding back over and over and over again. You're capable of so much more. Ralph, do you have a story you could share with us about a client who went from visibly displaying their nerves to uh, really transforming with maybe just one or two habit changes?
Yes, maybe with a bit of background information. You mentioned Cisco, Cisco Live. Cisco is a reference client of ours, by the way, which is why we can talk about this. For Cisco Live, the delegates who attend these technical sessions delivered by the engineers, when they fill out the evaluation, there are two parts. There's the question about, obviously, the technical skills of a speaker, but then there's another about their presentation skills. Now, a rational thinking human being would say there's no real connection between the two, because the fact that I'm a great engineer and a terrible presenter doesn't take away the fact that I'm a great engineer. However, what we've seen over the years so many times is that engineers who present with this monotone, boring approach where this is all enough and the technology will excite you, get bad scores obviously on their presentation skills, but also less good scores on their technical skills. And sometimes there's the skepticism by engineers like, do I really need a training? Is it enough if I know my content? And it was actually these numbers that made it clear to individuals how important it is to get their message across. And once we overcome that level of skepticism, it's easy to see people changing by looking at their audience longer, looking them in the eyes, feeling the connection, pausing instead of speaking fast and faster and faster, using gestures effectively, especially for in-person presentations. And all of these elements together don't change a single word on their presentation, on their content, but it changes the delivery. And surprise, surprise, the scores go up both. That's the unfair part. I would say it's not fair, but it's the reality. So an engineer who does a great job in knowing their stuff, of course, and being able to communicate well gets way better scores than someone who just reads their slides. And that was, for me, a key criteria to say, well, this makes a lot of sense. And it's not just a tick in the box or a soft skill to add on top if you run out of ideas what to do, but really fundamental for delivering an effective message to an audience.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ralph. That is such a compelling point. And you're making me think of an experience I had back in the fall. My son is attending a master's program at a geoscience department. So there's, masters and PhDs, and his advisor invited me to come speak to the department because she said it is astounding to me that we are responsible as scientists in presenting our research all the time, yet not a single offering of presentation skills or delivery skills is in their curriculum. And many of the students and faculty came up to me afterwards talking about how incredibly valuable it was, and increase their confidence in being able to get their message and important science out there. So yeah, absolutely agree. We have a great question that's come in from one of our audience members, and this goes back to the advice I was sharing about making sure you prepare. And Amy, you were saying that as well, having your message down pat. He said, "What about when you're put on the spot and don't have time to prepare? What advice do you either of you have for that?"
One thing I would say is most of us feel the need to respond right away with the proper answer. And when you're put on the spot, that's hard to do, even if you do know the answer. So remember a couple of things. One, take a breath. The couple of seconds that it takes to take a breath, no one's thinking what's going on with her. The other might be to paraphrase back what the person asked so that you can make sure you're actually answering the right question. If they put you on the spot, they're curious. They're engaged with what you have to say, which is another thing that I think is incredibly helpful to remember is if you're getting questions, people are with you, which is pretty great, right? If it's crickets out in the audience, then that's a different problem. So if they're asking a question, remember they're with me, they're engaged, they're curious. Paraphrase back, make sure you understand what they're asking, and then respond in a way that will get the point across in a concise way. So, you know, what do you think? Do you agree or do you disagree? And why is that? And can you support it with an example? Is a quick, easy structure to kind of get into your brain that will help you in those scenarios. You don't have to talk for 5 minutes. It can be a 30-second answer and still be super effective.
Great, great advice. Ralph, anything you want to add?
Bit similar. It's the same for me. I would say make sure you get a bit of time to think. And it could be to paraphrase the question, which I always like. As soon as the question is longer than a few words, it's good to make sure you fully understand it. Because where's the benefit if I answer what I thought the question was, then I go back to the person and say, did I answer your question? And they say, no, that was not my question at all. And you think, oh dear, what a waste. Whenever possible, I bring my toolkit. And the benefit of the toolkit, just have a sip of water. From the audience perspective, it's not a problem, but it forces you to pause. And especially when we're under adrenaline that we talked about before, pausing is pretty hard. But unless you want to shower your equipment, you're going to shut up while you drink. And so that gives your brain a little bit of time to think. And you may combine the two. You may paraphrase first, then have a sip of water, or just pause, as Amy said. Based on my experience, that gives our brain enough time to think and consider the question to at least start. And then usually when we start, and let's face it, when we're somewhere and being put on the spot, like Amy said, they're interested in, that would be one part. My other part would be, well, we are there for a reason. We are there most likely because we're the subject matter expert. So it's not like we don't know the answer. It's usually more the adrenaline that prevents us from thinking. And so if we force us to pause for a moment and start thinking, the answer comes. That's my experience.
Wonderful, wonderful. And for those that are joining us via just audio, Ralph expertly demonstrated the power of pausing and just taking a sip of water. And then the other thing I would add, which you touched on, Amy, is if you don't already have go-to frameworks in your back pocket, meaning a way to easily and quickly structure your thoughts so they come off clear and concise, make that a priority. And one that we recommend frequently is the PrEP framework. Amy, you want to briefly describe that?
Sure. So the prep framework is what is your position? So do you agree, disagree? What's the point that you want to make? The R is reason. What's your reason? Why do you agree with that? Or why do you say that this is not going to work? And then the E is an example or one piece of evidence to support that reason. And then that final P is the position again. So why you agree or disagree, etc. And that framing, that sandwiching of the reason and evidence really helps, especially when you're nervous, to have that last P there because it gets you to stop talking.
Mm.
Often people will try and feel like they need to keep rambling and talking until they get to an end, but this allows that to finish and really sound confident.
Love it. Love it. We have another great question that's come through. Jeff Marson, does speaking slower have the effect of calming yourself? What do you think?
I'm a big fan of pause, Jeff. I have been a fast talking person my whole life, and so it's taken me a lot of effort to be able to work to slow down. But what I find to be helpful is pausing helps me feel more calm. I feel more in control than if I just speak slowly. There are going to be times though where speaking slowly, you've taken control. Like, this is something that you want to drive home a point, then keeping it really slow drives home that point even more. But it doesn't, not all the time. That would be my take.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I agree. And I really appreciate the engagement with the audience. Please keep the questions coming. Also, if you have advice you'd like to share, drop that in chat as well. So, Amy, I'd love to spend some time talking about talk traps, which unfortunately really, really can undermine a person's credibility. Tell us a little bit about what they are and what advice you have for shifting them.
Yeah, talk traps are little traps, really, why they called that, little traps that we get into with our language that cause us to sound and really look less confident when we use them. So we've mentioned a couple of things that work in reverse, which is pausing is a great way to avoid the talk trap of filler words, for example. So filler words are ums, uhs, you knows. We all do them. It's a part of our language. Every language I'm sure on the planet has them. I only speak one other language, but I remember I had to learn the filler words in French, which was sort of funny. The idea of filler words, though, is that it connects the sentences without having to have a pause. So we, as the speaker, tend to feel like we're coming across as more fluid if we continue to speak. But unfortunately, from the audience's perspective, you actually sound and look more nervous because, again, it goes back to that idea of a speaker who's in control also can control the pause, doesn't have to have constant words happening. So thinking about avoiding filler words it's difficult to do because it's such a part of our language. One thing that I recommend to people when they're working on filler words is to practice your talk or the opening, as Carrie said, that first 30 seconds to a minute into the voice memo on your phone and then listen back. Do I have filler words or am I pausing? And could I practice again and see if I can get some of those to go away? And I could even use the strategy that Ralph mentioned, which is taking a sip of water to avoid having an extra filler word in there. But there are loads more talk traps, unfortunately. And you might actually notice, as I mentioned a few of these, maybe one or two that tend to stand out for you. Some of us will, in a meeting, for example, say something like, I'm so sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to share one little thing. Like that whole setup to what you're about to say makes what's coming sound weak, even if it's the most brilliant thing that you've ever thought of and shared. But the whole sorry, it's just a little thing. So we don't need to apologize. We don't need to minimize our ideas. And matter of fact, when we do that, we come across much less confident.
Another one I hear frequently is, "I may be wrong, but."
Yeah. 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 You're already creating doubt. Like if you think you're wrong, why should I believe you to be right? So that whole idea of qualifying like you just shared is really frustrating to an audience. And keep in mind that we are trying to not just help ourselves feel more confident, but help the audience feel confident in what we have to say. And these hedges of I'm not 100% sure, but it's really better if you can avoid using that kind of structure added onto your sentence. One last thing that I was thinking about was uptalk, where people will have the vocal pattern and instead of coming down at the ends of their sentences, they'll actually maybe even have a question at the end or their voice goes up. So it sounds something like, um, you you have been working on this project for the last 6 months. Is that right? You've been working on this project for the last 6 months. Is that right? Like everything is very doubtful, even if you think you may be incorrect. You've been working on this for 6 months. I'm curious to know what, and they can correct you But you can hear it in my voice, the difference between your voice coming down and your voice going up, like everything is uncertain. So ultimately, if we can avoid some of those talk traps, we will come across more confident, 100%. Our audience will believe what we have to say.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I can't underscore the importance of really, really being aware of whether or not you have a tendency to use qualifiers and really practice getting rid of them. Like, I think we should get started. Let's get started. We kind of missed the deadline. We missed the deadline, and here's what we're going to do about it. That subtle change projects so much more confidence and decisiveness. Izzy has another great one, Isabel Walker. Another top track is weakening your statement by saying, I think, or I feel, or I believe, when they are stating a fact. Instead, say, I'm confident that, or I know that. Again, such a significant difference. Okay, let's talk about uh, a meeting environment, which is one that many, many people struggle with. Ralph, what advice do you have for uh, folks that have difficulty getting into a conversation in a meeting or in a huddle, whatever the environment might be?
I would actually, again, step back a little bit and think about human personalities. Because statistically, half of us are extroverts and the other half are introverts. If you've worked with a disc model, you probably have heard about the four colors, right? The red and the yellow ones are more extroverts, the blue and the greens are more introverts. And we see that in meetings. Sometimes I make jokes about the extroverts to say, well, how should I know what I think before I hear what I say? So they usually speak up all the time and they wouldn't even think about the question that you've just posed. However, the introverts need to think before they speak up, and they rarely interrupt because they think it's not polite or they shouldn't do it. And how do you deal with such environment? My recommendation for definitely webinars, you have a great toolkit. Use it. Use the chat and make sure that you balance the interaction with the audience so that not everyone has to interrupt or to jump in. Raising your hand if you want to speak can work, but not always do the moderators or facilitators look at it. So if chat is there, you will significantly increase the participation because you help people to contribute. If this is an in-person meeting, you can take a similar approach. It wouldn't take too long to see where the extroverts are, right? Because they usually speak. So see that you can engage those that aren't contributing and give them an opportunity. Because at the end of the day, if we exclude the contribution from the introverts, we're missing 50%. It's a big mistake.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Amy, what would you add?
Yeah, I think what it comes down to it is the way that I was sort of interpreting what Ralph was saying was that he was maybe leading the meeting, and so wanting to draw on people that were in the meeting. But and you may be leading the meeting, and I would totally agree that making sure that you call on people, um, is a smart strategy. Maybe you're just a contributor in the meeting and you're not leading, which is a little bit different. But one thing I would add to what Ralph said is if you're leading it, to tee up people so that they can be successful, especially for someone who hasn't been speaking very much. They probably are in their head and they're planning what they want to say in 5 minutes. That's me. And so if Rob would say to me, "Hey, Amy, based on the fact that you've been uh, a facilitator with Power Speaking over the last 20 years, what advice would you have around," and then he'd ask me the question. So that would help me because I already know that the question's coming to me. Something that I've seen happen in meetings that is just it's so uncomfortable is the facilitator of that meeting or the leader of that meeting will just say, "Amy, what do you think?" And the person is left thinking, "Oh God, I was planning what I want to make a point about in 5 minutes, and I don't want to be disrespectful to this facilitator," right? So that kind of thing is helpful to remember if you're the one in charge. if you're in the meeting and you want to make sure that you get your voice in there, again, it's different, virtual versus in person, all of the things I would agree in virtually to use the tools in front of you. One other thing that I would say is if you struggle to get your voice into the room and you make an attempt or you raise your hand or you type into the chat and you haven't been recognized, and this has been consistent, ask a colleague. I would go to Ralph and say, "Hey, you're a lot more extroverted than me. If you see that I've tried and nobody acknowledged it, would you mind having my back?" And it is a great thing to have colleagues, right? Because we can have each other's back and say, Amy has something she'd like to point out, or Amy and I were talking just yesterday. I really want to make sure she gets to share her idea. And that does not look weak at all. Matter of fact, you planned it. And you're in charge when you do that. So just remember there are resources, including the people who are in that meeting, if you can think about ahead of time.
Excellent, excellent advice. And what advice would you have for someone who frequently gets talked over or loses the floor?
I mean, some of it is similar advice, which is I might go to a colleague if it's consistently happened and ask for advice, ask for them to be my backup in the meeting if I try to get a word in and then it, gets derailed. But I think there are a couple of other things to think about, which is one, plan what you want to say so that you can come out quick and direct because it's going back to that whole idea of talk traps. Often I've heard people say things like, "Excuse me, I just have something that I'd like to share that's similar to what we've been talking about." And there's so much setup to it that we lose the point. So instead, if you can interject your voice quickly and potentially say the person's name. So let's say that Ralph was talking for a little bit and he had some good things to say, and I want to tag on to that. I might say, "Ralph, I agree." And then straight to my point, right? I've thought about what I want to say. And as soon as you say the person's name, everyone in the room for just that split second stops. We're really attuned to hearing names and particularly our own. So if Ralph has been talking quite a bit, he's likely to pause for a second and then I get that chance.
Excellent. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Okay, Rolf, love to hear from you. One of the many things confident speakers, or at least speakers who project confidence, do well is they engage with their audience very, very quickly. What are your top tips for achieving that connection, that engagement out of the gate?
My personal approach is to split into two parts. The first one starts even before the meeting. If I have a chance to have a small talk with a few people in the room. Oh, and remember, I'm German. We don't learn small talks over here. I don't like it. But no one cares if I like it or not. It works quite well, right? And if I have people in the room where I'm presenting in a moment, then they're probably interested in what I have to say. So we should have something in common. And so just connecting to a few people, and it could be a simple question like, what are you interested in? From what the next topic is, or what's your experience, what's your background. It's not about a high sophisticated talk or analysis. It's just a few cents with a few people. The advantage of that is when I get on stage and I look through the room, I see more than just strangers because a few people I've already met and maybe they smile at me and that helps me to relax. So that's the first one. And talking about nerves and anxiety, the more I can relax, the more natural I am. The second is carried to what you said before is plan your opening. We always recommend not to start with a boring opening to say, good morning, good afternoon, this is my name, this is my title. And then immediately people think about, whoa, isn't there more exciting content here in my smartphone? So my suggestion is prepare an engaging opening. And what could that be? Well, it could be a provocative statement. When I don't work on subjects like we do today, I'm into compliance data protection. Well, the only thing I have to do is look into the news, who got hacked yesterday, or what are the things that come out. This usually works. I have something to make the audience think. I could ask a question to the audience where potentially I want a response. Then I could say, well, raise your hand, or I can use the digital version. I could come with Slido or all kinds of polls to make people react to my question. And I could share a story, of course, or I could come with a quote. My preferred quotes are from Einstein. I believe there's an Einstein quote for every situation in life. However, it's not limited to Einstein. So something that the audience doesn't expect. It could be your hobby. I love to ride the motorbike and I love to walk my dogs. And so I could use those as long, and here's the prerequisite, as long as I'm able to bridge my engaging opening to my content afterwards, it usually works quite well. Why? Because the audience is suddenly surprised. Like, what does the motorbike have to do with this? Or are we here for a dog talk or something? No, we're not. But there's an analogy, and that I want to refer to. And if at the end of the day they remember the motorbike, but remember that the talk was maybe about security or protecting something, perfect.
Ah, yes, great. Excellent, excellent, Rolf. Another one I would add is the importance of really mastering what we call eye interaction. And we're not talking about sweeping the room with your eyes or looking above the heads of your audience member or the back wall. We're talking about literally connecting with various audience members, holding that eye contact as you make a point, then going to the next individual, and so on. Uh, the other thing I'd add, just an example, Rolf, that just came to mind because I just came from a multi-day annual business retreat, and halfway through the day, I was going to be introducing one of the speakers, and this was on the heels of two very dense, somewhat overwhelming, but super important speakers that were talking about AI from different vantage points. So I stepped on stage and I said, just with a show of hands, how many of you would like to take a break from AI and talk about something uniquely human? And, instantly everyone's identifying and connected and leaning in. So it doesn't have to be overly complex. There are so many wonderful strategies to make that connection right out of the gate. And going back to the conversation we were having about how to effectively worm your way into a conversation or support others in getting into a conversation, whether you're the facilitator, meeting leader, or just colleague, comes from Marion Carroll. I always try to call on the quietest person. Yes, yes, love that, Marion. And setting it up in the way you described, Amy, to set them up for success and not put them on the spot, I think is a really effective technique. Okay, so got a tricky one for you, Amy. What advice do you have for maintaining your confidence when you're sensing skepticism?
Skepticism. Uh-huh.
Tongue twister.
Wow. Oh, oh, that it was difficult for me to say. Yeah, you're thinking that some people aren't really agreeing with your point of view or questioning your point of view, or maybe you've got crickets like you described. You're losing engagement. What advice do you have?
I think one thing that's important to remember is that the skeptics in the room are engaged participants in the room. So while they may have a funny look on their face or they seem doubtful that they agree with you and those kinds of things, they're still engaged because they're asking you questions. They have that furrowed brow because they're really thinking about what you just said. So I think it is important to remember that. And for me, that actually helps because I realized, well, shoot, I don't have to work hard to keep them interested. They are interested. They just have some questions. And so if I sense some skepticism, I may pause at some point and say, let me just do a quick process check. I'm sensing that there's some skepticism around the strategy that I just shared. Here's the benefit. I do know here's the benefit that we will see if we move forward with this process. What questions do you have right now that are burning in your mind? And just wait, like air it out. Let them share what their concerns are because often the concerns are actually manageable. You'll likely know the answer. You'll likely be able to respond to those. But when we keep this doubt and skepticism rolling in our brain, all our brain is going to do with that is fuel the fire of doubt. Oh, they're lost. They don't get it. They are never going to approve this, and you don't know that. You don't know that until you've paused to check. The disengagement piece is a little bit different because if you sense that, oh goodness, I'm in a virtual meeting, I'm not getting any chat happening, people have turned off their cameras or that kind of thing. One of the things that I would recommend is just remember some of the strategies that we talked about at the beginning. Like, take a deep breath, put your arms on the arms of the chair rather than in your lap so that you're taking up a little more space. And then think about what are the strategies I can do from the lowest risk to the highest risk that will get engagement. And Ralph mentioned some of these, but it might be as simple as type a 1 in the chat if you agree with this statement. Type a 2 if you disagree. Like, that is so low risk. And yet you'll get some engagement. And then you'll go, okay, well, I've got a few people. And then you can say, based on the fact that, 2 of you mentioned the 1, then you could maybe call on somebody and say, hey, Joe, I noticed you agreed. What would you have to say about that? And so you could push. That's a little more risky, right? But Joe is paying attention because he just messaged in the chat something really simple. So disengagement takes on different strategies if you're virtual versus in person. In person, it might be you use movement or you move to another side of your slide, or even better yet, when I teach in person, I always laugh because the strategy of using the B key where you blank the screen. So you're in an in-person space, there's a big screen behind you. You go up to your keyboard and you hit the letter B and it goes to black. Where does the attention go? Back to you, right? So you can, for that moment, people wake up for a second. And I always laugh because at the end of a workshop, we've spent 8 hours together and they're like, that B key, that is brilliant. And I was like, that was 10 seconds. But nonetheless, those little strategies can really make a difference. And sometimes it's just, you don't know what happened prior to your meeting. You don't know where these people have been. Maybe they're stressing out about another project. Hard to know.
All such practical, attainable advice, Amy. I'd add to that, and this is so simple yet so impactful, and frankly, it's not done very frequently. And that is, if you're in a virtual session, my goodness, don't have your slide displayed the entire time. For instance, if you're teeing up a discussion topic, put that slide out there, take it down so that you can all see each other and really engage in the conversation, not just looking at the slide the whole time. Simple, yet very effective. And we call that pattern disruption. Really seek opportunities to disrupt that pattern. Ralph, would love to bring you back into the conversation. What separates, in your experience, people who are technically good communicators from those who truly command the room?
That's a challenging one. I would say everyone can learn to present by just following the best practices that we've shared, like sometimes slow down or pause, make sure your slides are easy to understand. Don't go into what we call assisted reading. So if you avoid all of these trap faults, you can become a pretty good presenter and use the slides as kind of a guideline through your presentation, deal with a few Q&As, and you're done. But at the end of the day, that to me is presentation skills. Facilitation, to me, I would say the holy grail is a panel discussion where you are the moderator and you have these big brains or big titles, people who represent companies or something, and you are the one trying to get everyone aligned or make sure that there's a fair amount of talking time, etc. When it's all about facilitation, or if you go into an open Q&A, you have no idea what's coming up, but the whole goal is to have, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes of interactions. And I haven't seen a 10-point plan on how to become a good facilitator. Maybe there is one, then we could share it. To me, it's a lot of experience. First of all, not to have my own agenda. I could have a few ideas of what I wanted to do, but making sure that I can really listen to what people are saying, pause to process it, call on people, but in a nice way. And all of these things usually put a lot of stress on presenters, right? Just the fact that I pause when I'm under adrenaline and I pause, the pause feels like forever. But of course it's not. It's just a second or maybe 2 or 3. I haven't seen people pausing for longer than that, but to the presenter it feels like an eternity. To think about before you answer, to being able to shorten people, if like when we go back to the introverts versus extroverts, making sure that the introverts actually can stop talking and the extroverts can share. All of these things require a lot of confidence. And to me, that comes with experience. So I would say a good facilitator who's owning the room by definition is a great presenter. Otherwise, I would say you can't get there. And I would also invite everyone, take opportunities for those. Maybe take longer Q&A sessions than you feel familiar or you would usually take. Make sure you don't always have the right answer. For example, if someone asks a question, you're giving a technical talk, and someone asks a question and you're not sure, one of the strategies would be to say, well, let me actually play it back to the room. Is anyone here able to answer that question? Now, that puts a lot of stress on me because there may be no one in there who wants to answer it. But by just taking these kind of limited and controlled risks, we're getting better and better at this. And the rest to me is practice. There's the nice phrase I learned from my dear friend John Warren, who said, practice, yeah, to a degree makes perfect, but much more practice makes permanent.
Mm, great. Oh, that's so great. And I would say one of the keys to moving from a technically strong presenter to one that truly commands that space is all about cultivating what we call powerful presence. It's oftentimes referred to as executive presence. We prefer powerful presence because it's not about title. Anyone can cultivate this. And we have, I think, a few really, really good blogs on this topic. So if our moderator or uh, producer could find that and drop that link in chat, that would be terrific. And we've also done an entire Power Speaking Live on this event, so that would be another great resource for you. One more, Amy, before we move to our parting advice. What's a small communication habit that creates a surprisingly big boost in perceived confidence? And thank you to our producer. He's on it and already dropped that resource for you in chat.
So I think the key is the word perceived confidence, because you feeling confident versus what the audience views is different, right? We get to those at different times. We actually get to the place of perceived confidence usually faster. So a couple of things. One, I would say is if it's in person, it's controlling your eye contact and your hand movement. If you can get your arms to relax, if you can engage your eyes with audience members rather than what Carrie was saying was scanning, you will appear like you're in control. Virtually, we don't see as much of the gestures. So your hands are less important there. But I think eye contact is another way that we can engage and look like we're in charge. I know that this was one thing, but I would say slash pause. We've talked about that a lot today, and I think eye contact and pause are super powerful, particularly in a virtual space when we don't see the entire body in front of you when you're presenting.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I would add, particularly in the virtual environment, how essential vocal variety is. Learn to play with the musicality of your voice. Take it from high to low, fast to slow, staccato to legato, real staccato. Really, really vocal variety, uh, absolutely essential. All right, let's close. And thank you so much to our audience. You have been just wonderfully engaged. Uh, let's close with your parting advice. If our audience remembers just one thing about enhancing their confidence when communicating, what would that be? Rolf, let's lead with you.
Make friends with the nerves. Remember what Amy said at the beginning: anxiety and excitement have the same biological responses in our body. So reframe it, make friends with the nerves.
Amy?
I would say it comes down to preparation and practice for your body and for your brain. So for your body, it's practice. Even if it's 1 minute, jumping jacks, walking around the room, go outside, take some deep breaths, get your face into the sunshine. That's preparing you to come across and feel more confident. It does work. And then preparing your brain is preparing your content, get that opening down so that you can feel good, or think about what's that one point you want to make in the meeting, and visualizing your success. Too often, we are awesome at visualizing our failure, but we have the power to control that and tell our brain, and I do this, thank you so much for that terrible advice. I'm now going to listen to the smarter half of my brain and really visualize me having fun, me connecting with my audience, me being helpful so that when the audience leaves, they're going to go take the action that they need to take to do the next step. That feels good.
Absolutely. Oh, such sage advice. And remember, a closed mouth is a closed destiny. Put those hopes, those dreams, those ideas out in the universe. Thank you all so much for joining us. We're going to close by teeing up our topic for next month, which is all around how to use language to build trust. Trust is core component to cultivating strong relationships. So please join us to discuss the language of trust, communicating with credibility and compassion. Thank you so much.